This is a cave in Rhodesia. Inside are 4 members of Mr. Mugabe's guerrilla forces. Outside is the Rhodesian army.
So we're just dragging the dead crew out at the moment. Give us 5 minutes for that, and let's say another 10 to get the 3 captures plus an escort into the LZ, and then you can send the top. It'll take 15 minutes from now.
The Rhodesians claim to have the finest army in the world. This is an exaggeration. It is, however, the most unusual and possibly the most efficient counter-guerrilla force operating today. This film is about the men, white and black, who make up the casualty figures which appear in a small paragraph at the bottom of the front page. The Rhodesian army is tiny. At any one time, it has no more than 20,000 men on the ground. Of these, only 4,000 are full-time professionals. Of the remaining 16,000, half are Africans serving in the police or in local defense units. The other half are white Rhodesians who serve on a part-time basis. Because of sanctions, the Rhodesians are very short of modern weapons. They have few helicopters. Their aircraft are old and outdated, and much of their equipment is locally made. Their country is 1.5 times the size of Britain. Most of it is rugged and sparsely populated. They have nearly 2,000 miles of hostile border. Because of the equipment shortage, this vast area is patrolled by men on foot. They are faced with between 7,000 and 8,000 guerrillas inside the country and a further 15,000 to 20,000 outside. By all the normal military equations, the Rhodesian army should have been defeated several years ago. That it is still more or less in control of the situation reflects not so much on the Rhodesians as on the competence of their enemy.
Come on, come on, come on, come on!
Of the 20,000 men on the ground, 50% are black. But in the small regular army, that proportion rises to nearly 80%.
Come on, quickly!
Blacks join up in the main for economic reasons, and there are always more potential recruits than the army can actually handle. Thus, the recent announcement by the Rhodesian government of the introduction of black conscription can be best interpreted as a political gesture. The recruits are mostly unsophisticated country lads.
Roger, I'll be in your area at figures 5 minutes to come and pick you up. Roger, Kabe. Roger, stand by.
Their basic training lasts 6 months. In that time, they absorb little more than the rudiments of their new profession. It takes a further 2 years under good NCOs and officers before they can be regarded as fully trained.
Roger, I'm nearly to drop you down now.
Their training pays as much attention to normal warfare as it does to counter-guerrilla tactics. The Rhodesians take the threat of outside military intervention very seriously indeed.
Come on, put time up.
In the present war, the Rhodesians have learned that they must use their limited resources as effectively as possible. Most of their helicopters and their best troops are concentrated into 4 mobile strike units around the country, 2 black and 2 white. These are called Fire Force. This is a Fire Force base. For weeks at a time, it is home for the men stationed here. Their job is to stand by to assist other units in their area in the event of a contact with the guerrillas or a sighting by an observation post. A Company, 2nd Rhodesian African Rifles, has had a very successful record. In a 3-month period, it accounted for over 100 guerrillas killed for the loss of only one man. The company commander spent 22 years in the British Army. For the last 3 years, he has served in Rhodesia. His officers are all in their early 20s.
I went to the DZ to pick up the terrors.
The commander is a typical fighting soldier, intensely loyal to his men, who in turn are utterly devoted to him. Half the regular army is parachute trained. The manner and the extent to which the Rhodesians employ paratroops is unique in the history of warfare. Since the war began, there have been some 10,000 operational jumps. Some of the men in this company have parachuted into action over 40 times. Other units have jumped even more frequently. In no other war have soldiers parachuted anything like this often. The reason for this somewhat hazardous form of transport is simple. There are not enough helicopters. A fire force unit has only 4 or 5. One is for the company commander, from which he controls the battle on the ground. The others carry only 4 men each. Thus a maximum of 16 men can be deployed at any one time by helicopter. With the paras, the total force amounts to little more than 35 men. There are over 100 men in the company, and they are therefore deployed in rotation. The officers, however, are sent out on every call. The paras are flown in by aging Dakotas. Some of these aircraft first saw service in World War II. One Dakota has been repainted so often that because of the extra weight of paint, it can no longer carry a full load. The ride, flying at low level, is frequently very bumpy and has earned the plane the nickname the Vomit Comet. When Fire Force is deployed, the men are told only 2 things: the flying time to the target and the number of guerrillas they may expect to meet. All the aircraft go in low so as to reduce the warning of their approach. They are talked onto the target by the patrol who have spotted the enemy. Speed is vital. As soon as the guerrillas are aware of what is happening, they disperse into the thick bush and either try to escape or simply hide. As the first chopper comes into land, an airstrike is put in on the suspected guerrilla position. The troops are landed as near to the target as the terrain will allow. They are either dropped off in sticks of 4 men each, all round the area, or, as in this case, together. They form into extended line and sweep towards the enemy. A second airstrike is called in. The paras fly in at a height of between 400 and 500 feet. They are dropped on the nearest available piece of open ground. If there is nothing suitable, they must take their chance among the trees and rocks. The injury rate can sometimes be quite high. The company commander circles overhead in his helicopter throughout the operation, directing the battle. The helicopter troops have found 3 girls who are living with the guerrillas. They say there are 10 guerrillas in a camp at the top of the hill.
The ridge directly to my south where I'll stop.
The men take the girls with them to show them the way to the camp. The troops advance, quickly at first, and then more cautiously as they near the position. Every safety catch is on fire, every finger is on the trigger. Whoever sees the other man first in this war lives. They find the camp But as expected, it is deserted.
One, we found a discarded bag of blankets. When I say a bag, it's pieces of cloth sewn together as a blanket container, nothing else, copy?
An uneaten meal testifies to the speed with which the guerrillas left the area.
Flattened grass.
Beyond the position, there is a slight movement in the bush. A man has died. On the other side of the hill, the paras have hit trouble. A machine gunner opened fire on 2 guerrillas at a range of 5 yards. He killed one, but then his gun jammed and he was shot in the head by the second. The man helping to load the body onto the helicopter is Richard Sissel. My partner in making this film, he was killed a week later. In the confusion, the second guerrilla managed to crawl away. The paras go after him and catch a fleeting glimpse in the distance. But this is very thick bush, and he escapes. As they continue the sweep, something moves in the undergrowth. A soldier hesitates, and a woman's life is saved. He had glimpsed the pattern on her dress and held his fire. Few civilians are as lucky as this woman and her child. Many die in circumstances just like these. Once the soldiers are convinced that all the guerrillas are dead or have escaped, they relax. Then starts the clearing up. One of the officers examines the rifle of the man he killed. Like many guerrilla weapons, it has been badly maintained. This one is filthy. A large number of the rifles they find do not work at all. It is difficult to understand why this is so, as the Russian Kalashnikov AK-47 assault rifle is almost indestructible. But this happens frequently and reinforces the professional contempt the Rhodesian soldiers feel for their enemy. Despite the large number of guerrillas inside Rhodesia, there is a marked absence of experienced leaders in the bush. This goes against the most basic rules of guerrilla warfare. The man killed by the para-machine gunner turns out to be a platoon commander. By guerrilla standards, he is fairly senior. But his rifle is not merely dirty, it simply doesn't work. Lying nearby, the soldiers find a satchel full of documents. All the guerrillas keep detailed diaries of their activities. Such records are absolutely forbidden in any disciplined army, guerrilla or otherwise, as they provide useful intelligence to the enemy. Amongst other things, this haul contains a death list of local African civilians that this group intended to kill. Elsewhere, the soldiers are making a space for the helicopters to land. More than 80% of the guerrillas inside the country come from the Mozambique bases of Robert Mugabe. Some of his men have operated in the Rhodesian bush for as long as 2 years, living off the land and all but out of touch with their commanders. The Rhodesians claim to have killed some 6,000 of them inside the country since the war began. That figure is accurate. What is less certain is the number killed in raids into Mozambique and Zambia. The lowest estimate is 3,000, but many put it as high as a further 6,000. Once the clearing up is over, the choppers return to pick up the soldiers. Today they have an extra load. The girls will be taken for questioning and then be released. The fire force are sent to investigate a village suspected of harboring guerrillas. They enter the village and the African soldiers instinctively recognize that things are normal. However, they question the locals. The penalty for assisting the guerrillas is imprisonment. The penalty for assisting the army is possible death at the hands of the guerrillas themselves. The position of unarmed civilians in a country torn by war is never enviable. The headman is taken away for questioning.
We've searched their huts, but we haven't taken anything, okay? We're going to take this man with us for questioning, but he won't be harmed, all right? You better tell these people that he will be back with them within the next few days. Next few days he'll come down. Yeah, well, at the moment our guys are getting into the LZ and the ones running in the middle have been sorting out. Okay, you must just come with me, all right?
For the men of Fire Force, the war is relentless. Day after day, they leave the security of their base and fly into action. The kill ratio of the Rhodesian security forces operating inside the country is roughly 10 to 1. This includes men killed by landmines, in road ambushes, and those serving in low-grade defense units. However, these figures can be somewhat misleading. In straight fighting with their regular companies, the Rhodesians kill, on average, 60 or 70 guerrillas for the loss of every man. The men of this fire force have also fought inside Zambia and Mozambique. There, where the enemy is concentrated in large numbers, the end result has often been little short of wholesale slaughter. In this type of operation, the paras drop from 400 feet. Other specialist units often jump from 20,000 feet at night. The Rhodesian SAS employ the latest freefall techniques when raiding across the border. They drop for 18,000 feet before opening their chutes to avoid detection. Inside Rhodesia, there is no need for stealth, as the helicopter troops have already gone in. Once on the ground, the paras regroup as quickly as possible and advance towards a small collection of huts a few hundred yards away. Near the huts is a suspected guerrilla position, and an airstrike is called in. To get to the village, the men have to advance through a maize field. They move, as usual, in extended line, knowing that at any moment they may meet the enemy at a range of 4 or 5 yards. The guerrillas are lying hidden. The soldiers are walking upright, completely exposed to fire. Against a competent enemy, this will be suicide. Meanwhile, the helicopter troops are advancing on the guerrilla position nearby. The mixture of fear and self-control shows clearly as they move forward. In this war, the killing is done at such close range that a soldier actually sees the expression on his victim's face as he dies. A guerrilla dies. Another man dies, this time an innocent civilian. But in this war, the man who shoots first survives. In the village, the situation is very tense. The fighting continues in the maize field round about. There is an unusually large number of healthy young men in what is a small family kraal. Guerrillas often wear 2 sets of clothing, so the young men are stripped and checked. The huts are searched. Although the soldiers come from exactly this sort of village background, they have little sympathy for those they suspect of harboring guerrillas. Since the war began, over 100 black soldiers have been murdered by guerrillas while visiting their families in their tribal homes. Nor are their families safe. Several of the men in this company have relatives who are guerrillas. One lance corporal knowingly and deliberately killed his own brother in a skirmish. The soldiers find definite evidence of a guerrilla presence. Every hut is stripped, and they unearth a first aid kit. Just outside the village, in a maize field, a guerrilla is killed, and his weapons are brought in. The long-term effect on these young men of the continued killing is not yet to be seen. But the immediate conclusion must be that they are becoming indifferent to violence and insensitive to suffering. But they at least are members of a highly disciplined organization, the regular army. The youngsters fighting as guerrillas do not have the same restraints, and with them the possible psychological effects are far more worrying. Used to enforcing their demands on the population through the power of a gun, sometimes witness to or participants in extreme brutality against defenseless civilians, it is doubtful if they will ever fully adjust to the routine and comparative boredom of normal life. This problem is not confined to Rhodesia. It is a depressing feature of all guerrilla wars, which by their very nature encourage lawlessness and a bandit mentality. As the men pack up their parachutes for use on another day, they can think only of the present. Tomorrow they may not number amongst the survivors. And indeed, shortly after this, the young para-officer was shot in the throat and killed. The real horror of war is not the fear and violence on the battlefield. It is the anguish of those left behind and the agony of those who survive as physical or psychological cripples. It is the appalling waste of brave and the destruction of dreams which all of us share. For Rhodesia, the future holds despair. If white morale collapses, or the army is dismantled, there will be total chaos. Civil war will break out between Mr. Mugabe and Mr. Nkomo, and while the whites may escape, the African civilians will die in countless thousands. At least 13,000 Rhodesians on both sides have died so far. That figure could fade into insignificance.